Excellent. Hello, everybody. Again, if you joined yesterday, Tony, it's also nice to see you. If you joined yesterday, grab that drink of water, go to the bathroom, do whatever you need to. Just turn your mic off and your camera off, right? That would be the Zoom horror of the day, so we don't want that. So what is competency-based education? We talked about this yesterday. It's the actual student learning and the focus on that actual application of that learning, and not so much how much time we spend in class. So it's not, the focus is not on the 15 weeks that we spend in class, but instead is what is it that we expect our learners to know and be able to do by the end of my class, right? We measure progress based on the learner's ability to demonstrate mastery at some preset criterion for that particular competency. So if we say communication skills at this certain level is what's needed, then in order for them to progress, I've got to see them demonstrate those communication skills at that level in order to move forward. So we're focused on that actual student learning, the application of that learning, more than we are on the course and credit hour structure. So we talk about what a competency is, right? A competency is, next slide, the knowing, the doing, and the behaving. So it's the knowledge, the skill, and the ability, and the intellectual behaviors working together so that they can be applied and transferred into a given credential or context. So what is it, if somebody's going to earn this credential, that they need to know and be able to do, and how should they behave? How should they hold themselves? What should their interpersonal behaviors look like? You all use that word disposition a lot in education. We debated using the word disposition here. And then there were so many people outside of education who said, oh, that means you're predisposed to be a certain way and you can't overcome it. You either are or you aren't. And so we didn't want to use that, conjure up that kind of image. And so we say it's an intellectual behavior. It's something you can learn to behave in this particular way. So what is it they need to know, be able to do, and how do they need to behave if this is what they're going to earn for a credential? Next slide. When we talk to one another, broadly speaking, across work, across the military, across community organizations, across higher ed, in the language of competency, it allows us to really connect, compare, and validate what people know and can do. So right now, the only way we can give credit for what somebody knows is if they set one of our classes and they earned a grade. But what happens if they developed a skill set in their work-based environment that rises to the level of a college level performance, meets your criterion referenced assessment guidelines, right? How can I give them credit for that if they didn't sit in my class? Well, when we start to talk about competencies as the currency, I now have a way of saying, well, if you know this and you can do this, then I have a way that I can receive in that learning into my academic program. It allows us to truly connect learning that's happening across all settings, allows us to compare. Is yours as good as mine? So Beth was on our last breakout. Beth, who leads for INCRA, right? All the training and the professional development work. Can I compare what a PD provider does to what I do in higher ed? If we're using competencies, if we're using shared assessments, shared language, absolutely I can compare that. Can I validate that if somebody got this competency or learned this competency in a non-higher ed classroom, can I validate that they in fact can do it? Sure. That's kind of what the future of prior learning assessment looks like. So for us, competencies is that big undergirder. It's the thing we need in order to be able to really unleash the future of education and to align it to the future of work. Go ahead, next slide. So there is not one official definition of CBE. We are working on it in a piece of federal legislation right now, but it hasn't been adopted yet. And so as a result, every institution creates their own definition of CBE. So most talk about it's what you know and can do. It's about mastery or getting to proficiency. We use assessments to help us know whether or not you reach mastery or proficiency, and we will help a learner get from wherever they are when they start to where the end performance needs to be by the time they finish, right? So those are the elements that typically go into a person's view of what CBE is. For some, they also say, and time is going to be variable. I don't care how long it takes you to do it. You can be really, really fast or you can go slow. There are some constraints with that for federal financial aid. That was my little asterisk moment there. You can go slow as you need to go, but what's most important is I've got to make sure you, in fact, have those knowledge, skills, abilities, and intellectual behaviors before you earn that credential. Don't really care where you learn it in some programs. So for some, you might have picked up the skill working in a child care center, but I don't have the knowledge, but I can do the skill. I just don't understand why I'm using this particular skill at that particular time. So I might not try to teach the skill part, but I am going to teach them the knowledge part that undergirds the skill, if that makes sense. So I don't care where and how they got the learning. If they don't have it, I've got a pathway to put them on that's going to get them to performance. And then finally, a lot of schools use flexibility as much as they can to try to personalize the learning journey. So instead of saying everybody is going to proceed in lockstep just like this, we're all different. We all bring different gifts. So why can't I have a differentiated instruction based on who I am and where I am in my journey? And so a lot of schools build in that kind of flexibility and personalization in their CBE program. Go ahead to the next slide. Unless you want me to answer a question there. I thought I heard you say, get ready to say something.
Well, if you don't mind, I will go back one slide. And this is just, addressing kind of, I think, a common question that we heard yesterday that continues to kind of bubble up, which is, if I am in a course-based structure, but I want to use competencies and I want to use the rigorous assessments, how might time be variable? What do institutions do that still have like a regular course and a regular semester? Can you give some examples, Charla, of what that looks like in action?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. If you are still using a course and credit hour structure, you don't have a ton of tools to choose from. So what most institutions will use is some sort of a grading mechanism. So I might give a PR grade for in progress, or an IP grade for, or an IC grade for incomplete. I've seen all over the board how schools will say this learner's in progress. They're still working on it, but they're not quite there. The question is, do they have to repay for not being quite there? Can they continue on? So they'll either have to do something detrimental in grade, like an F, and then it replaces when you pay and take it again. Very rarely is that done. Most use a grading mechanism like an in progress grade. So for example, the University of Maine at Presque Isle, up in obviously Maine, they're an all CBE institution. And when they first made that transition from course and credit based, or from they're still face to face in instruction, but the modality they use is all competency based. They had students in math classes. There were about 70 students in their various college algebra, I think is actually what the class was. And if they get to the end of the term in December and they have about 50 of those learners that have not demonstrated competence, and they're like, oh crap, what are we going to do? Like, of the 70, only 50 have made it. And the faculty talked and they're like, I think they're close. I mean, I think they could get there. And so they decided, because they hadn't determined this, they decided we'll give them an incomplete or an in progress grade. Faculty agreed over the winter break that they would continue to work with those learners. They'd send them notes, ask them how they're doing. They'd continue to provide feedback. Hopefully, when they would all return from the holiday break, they would be able to reassess, and many of them would be ready to go on to their next math class. Or whatever their next competency was. So these faculty spent time on their winter holiday and continued to coach the learners. And when they came back, the vast majority, immediately upon returning to campus, were able to demonstrate competence in math. They just needed another couple of weeks in order to get there. But instead of hitting that arbitrary 15-week and failing them and saying, oops, sorry, you'll have to take that again, or you failed and the person's like, I knew I would fail. I knew I wasn't good at college, and they leave and never come back. We instead said, you're almost there, right? It sounds like a great approach, right? And then their accreditor came for their visit, their 5-year or 10-year visit, and their accreditor saw all of these IPs that were given, and they raised a red flag, and they're like, this is bad. And then when they dug in and they began to see what it was from, they're like, wow, that was great, because in essence, by the end, all but a few, I think it was less than 5 of those learners actually was able to demonstrate. So that's where that time variability can be so helpful to learners. Could I just have 1 or 2 more weeks to grasp that concept? And a good CBE program will find ways for that flexibility.
Thanks, Charla.
So I'm wondering if those of you that heard this yesterday, there were a number of people who said, my institution will never go CBE. My institution will never be the University of Maine Presque Isle. Just mark that down, because you never know in 10, 15 years what's going to happen in the future of higher education. But I'll give you that most of your institutions right now are not going to go fully CBE. So does that mean I can't? And the answer to that is no. Your accreditor, as well as the field, looks at it at the programmatic level. So you would say, for this program, for this degree, for this credential, do you articulate for learners what it is they know and must do? Do you require mastery of all of those competencies in order to earn the credential? Do you use rigorous assessment? Do you have a learning? If you have those things, then your accreditor, as well as the field, would say that meets the definition of CBE. Okay, so some do it in a course and credit hour structure, others do not. That's called a direct assessment program. But it's about, do you look at that full credential, thinking about a backward design kind of approach to that. So many institutions will say, oh, I can't get my dean there, or I can't get my provost there. And so they may start by embedding competencies into single courses, and that's great. It's a pathway towards a fuller programmatic competency-based implementation. But it is perfectly fine to begin to embed competencies, to think about how we take prior learning by competency, these other kinds of competency-based mechanisms that can help you get to a full CBE program as steps without being able to fully do the dance. I think it's harder, I would say, to get the benefits of CBE without going fully in. The benefits that you see may be a bit more limited, but it is still perfectly acceptable to embed a competency into a course as an example there. Hope that helps.
Great. I think, and I do want to pause before we transition over to Martha Cheney to talk a little bit more just about Walden's experience and go into some detail there. Any questions just about kind of this like level setting language? Just want to pause and see if there's any questions that come to the surface here.
Can I ask a question regarding what we just answered? Is there any incident that the students couldn't go along, even though you gave them like during the winter break, during the summer break, they still cannot pass that mastery level? Then is there any evidence or incidents that the faculty had to work with that particular students cannot move on to next level of it? The frustration of both ways. How does that, do you see those kind of incidents? Because I have those students who are not ready for coming to university, but they coming in and then they cannot really keep passing because of a content area, knowledge is lack, as well as the performance level is lack. And then you kind of wonder how far you can push them, and then how much you're going to be working with them while they cannot go to the next level. Their frustration level gets really high, but then the university kept asking you to pass them when they're not ready to pass, right? So in that scenario, have you ever seen any university tackled
Yep. So
appropriately?
what I would say it's a great question, from a competency-based program, we wouldn't be able to pass them. And you would just have to say to your university, we have criterion referenced assessment that tells us what their performance is. I am happy to transfer them to a non-competency based program where unfortunately we do that stuff all the time. But in our CBE program, I'm making a public declaration that if you get this credential that's offered in a CBE format, you will know and be able to do these things. So a lot of times faculty like to say, oh, CBE, that's easier. It's actually harder because you can't pass them along. You have to say, I am very sorry. I don't, I want to say, I also think we have an obligation to make sure, is our learning journey well built? Did we really do everything? Is it me and the learner that's not connecting? Would another faculty be able to get them there? I really want us to resort everything we possibly can. But if that learner isn't able to get there, then we would have to not keep them in our program because they would not be able to progress and they would move to a traditional program. For my provost, that was the very hardest thing for him to buy into when I was starting our CBE programs in my college. It was, well, what am I going to do if they don't pass? And I said, I'm going to give them right back to you. So, and then you can do what you already do today, which is just pass them along and do a disservice, right? So that would be the comment I would make there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Charla. Martha, why don't we hand it over to you to tell us a little bit more about your journey, and we can get some, we can dig deeper, get some details around the Walden experience.
Absolutely, and thank you, Lisa. So yesterday in the general session, we did talk just a little bit about Walden University and kind of its history and pathway and how it came to competency-based education. And today I want to just go a little deeper, share a little bit more about my experience as a program director and developer of a CBE program at Walden, and just in keeping with our casual approach, please feel free to ask questions as they come along. So Walden really has always been a leader in adult learner in offering learning opportunities for adult students, working adults. It's kind of been our reason for existing, honestly. And CBE was really appealing for a couple of key reasons. One was the flexibility that it offered our students. We know our students are very, very busy people. They have kids, they have parents. So more and more people are in that sandwich situation where they not only have their children at home, but they're caring for older parents. Many of our students are first in their families to go to college at all, let alone seek graduate degrees. So they are people that are very dedicated, very focused, but very, very busy. So anything we can do to help them build their studies around the reality of their lives seems like an important value proposition for us. So that flexibility is huge. The other piece that we really keep an eye on is the relevance. I think that I hope that our students come and really enjoy their experience learning at Walden, and many of them tell me that they do, but they're not coming for a good time. They really are coming for very specific reasons. They want to, achieve more opportunities in their jobs. They want to get a higher salary. They want to meet personal goals and show their children. As I said, often this is a really big deal for our students. It's not something that's just, oh, this is traditional in my family, everybody goes to college and gets a graduate degree. That's not our population. And so they really need programs that are relevant, that are authentic, that can help them get the skills that they need to advance in their fields. So as I share with you a little bit more about Walden and what we did, and I just want to make sure that it's super clear that this is just one example. It's one story from one institution and one way of doing CBE. And competency-based education is a very large tent. It's got room for lots of different models, and lots of change and evolution is taking place inside that big top. You know, it's not a static situation. So what I'm sharing with you today is just one example that hopefully will shed a little light on the model from that perspective of a story and of a real lived experience, and hopefully pique your interest and curiosity about how your institution might be able to infuse some CBE elements in your programs. So we started with an existing program, and we chose our Master's in Early Childhood Studies, partly because we knew that that was an area educators tend to be open and excited about new learning models. So we thought we'd have good reception there. And also that student population, we thought this could be a really beneficial approach for those folks. We know that people who work in early childhood typically work very long hours. They typically don't make a lot of money. They typically have been in the field for a long time, sometimes decades. And they're mostly women with tremendous, family and other obligations and responsibilities. So it seemed that competency-based learning, with its high level of relevance and flexibility and the potential, anyway, to shorten the timeline to completion, at least in our model, that this could be valuable for our students, saving them time and money. So in order to keep that, that promise of relevance, we wanted to do more than just, build out a textbook-based program. We wanted to really make sure that we had the currency, that we had the voices from the field, from the people who were out there, living life in the early childhood realm. And so we pulled together people from professional organizations like the National Association for the Education of Young Children, Head Start, thought leaders, just a whole variety of early childhood leaders, and brought them together and asked them to think about what are those essential skills, what's the knowledge they would love to see our graduates come to them with if they came out of our program and went to seek employment. And we learned a lot. We got a lot of great insight about the needs of the field and the importance of looking at the field across sectors, not just the early care and education settings, but beyond that to, nonprofits, to government agencies, to home visiting, to hospital settings, all the different places where people do work that impacts young children and families. So we pulled all that great input together and we took it back to our faculty. Next slide. And we sat with our faculty who in and of themselves had great expertise and background in early childhood, many with vast experience, and because of our faculty model, lots of people who are current practitioners in the field, still working in actively in early childhood settings of one kind and another. So we sat with them and we took all that great input from the stakeholder group, and we looked also at our existing content, and we talked about, we got some great ideas about competencies from the stakeholder group, but we had to think about, are there gaps? Is there enough breadth and depth to really justify and honor that, conferring of a master's degree? Are we addressing the appropriate levels of scholarship? And so we had to do a lot of, mixing and matching and cutting and dicing and recombining. And we came up with a slate of 37 competencies that we aligned to 10 courses. You can see in this graphic that in this particular program, not true in even all the Walden programs, and certainly not in programs across institutions, but in this particular program, there was not a set number of competencies that aligned to a course. That was variable, but we did line everything up so that the competencies, the entire content of the two delivery systems was cohesive and well aligned. And we made sure that to the best of our ability, there weren't important gaps, and we were meeting the expectations for a master's degree. So here's one example of a course, Effective Programs and Practices, lined up with plans developmentally appropriate curriculum, evaluates program quality, and engages family and communities. Next. So great, we have this slate of competencies. That's wonderful, very exciting, but that's far from complete, because we need to think about how are we going to assess that competency? How do we know if that learner has actually achieved that competency? How do we know that they can plan developmentally appropriate curriculum? So we utilize a backward design process and begin by thinking about what is the evidence, what kind of performance will show and that learner's level of competence. What is it that we need to see and have them do so that we can make sure, as Charla said, that when they leave, they've got that. And so in this particular case, we had them go out in the field. They work in an actual early childhood setting. They create a whole series of learning experiences. And they have to demonstrate that they understand what is developmentally appropriate content, what are developmentally appropriate teaching strategies and assessments. And then they have to reflect on that process so that they can demonstrate that they actually know and understand the theory behind that. They really have a deep understanding of developmentally appropriate practices. So once we have the assessment in place, we have to think about how are we going to score it. We can't run it through a Scantron. This kind of robust, complex assessment, really takes that human faculty touch. And so here's another enormous piece of the process, is developing rubrics that truly have the specific, clear criteria that differentiate performance levels. Is this person just emerging? Do they have a little bit of it? Which pieces are missing? What is it that they need to work on? Or do we also have criteria that says, wow, they've just knocked the top off of this. They completely have it and understand it, and they have great mastery of this particular competency. So the rubric was a huge piece. And then we had to think about, all right, how do we get them ready to get to that assessment? We know that a lot of our students come with a lot of experience, but given, even with tons of experience, there may be gaps. They may know how to do the skill, but they may not understand why, or they may have some grasp of the theory and not be very skilled at the practice piece. We need to make sure that they have all that they need to actually demonstrate that competency. And we did have a handful of students, we typically do, who come with, some academic background, but don't have the hands-on experience, and they really need the whole soup to nuts array of resources and activities to help them learn what they need to know to achieve that competency. So it's really important that this competency package include absolutely everything for a person who's basically starting at a foundational level.
I think,
so what are those materials and activities? What does that look like? It could include textbooks. It can include articles, journal articles, research. And of course, you want to balance that between the theory and the practice. Make sure that they have both pieces. They have that knowledge, they have the skill. And then how do we also work in there those professional dispositions that we call them, or intellectual behaviors, that kind of that approach, the soft skills, that has to be worked in as well. And I think it's also important in this to certainly include various modalities. We want to give students things that they can listen to, things they can view and observe, things that they can read. We want to keep the materials engaging, opportunities for peer interaction, lots of opportunities to generate instructor communication and feedback with the students. All those pieces are critically important so that the students have what they need to move on toward that assessment and prove their competence. It's a very, very big job.
And one thing I just wanted to highlight for those on the call who may not be familiar is this competency package, if you will, is truly what the Gateways Competency Project and modules developed and are being piloted at institutions now. And so we're sharing this knowing that there will be a set of competency packages, if you will, that eventually will be out in the world. But right now they're being piloted. We're gathering that early feedback and things like that. But even if you were to eventually use those competency modules, there's a chance that you have other competencies in your program, or you may need to develop supplemental competencies for a specific part of your program that really meets a local need, whatever that might be. And so I think it's helpful to see this, but I also just wanted to call it that this is also the work that that the faculty fellows and 5 of our institutions that were part of the pilot have been doing too.
Absolutely, and a really big job. And because faculty is so central to not only to this kind of endeavor, but of course, any higher ed, we know we can't do it without faculty. Faculty is at the heart. So I really want to spend the last few minutes focused on faculty and faculty roles and faculty concerns and some of the experiences we had and lessons learned around our faculty. So we started off with unbundled roles, which is not unusual for competency-based. We had a separate assessor who just did the scoring of assessments and giving feedback. We had the instructional support faculty subject matter expert who did the typical, faculty mentoring, supporting students as they were going through their learning journey. And then we also have coaches, which is not a faculty role in our model, and they provide some sort of advising and logistical supports, like helping plan the program of study, or getting to the financial aid or the right tech support. But also they do some academic support functions, like they can help with APA, they can help with writing, they can help with research skills. Hey, I'm struggling to use the library. The coach can go in and walk them through that. So they were really valuable, and a role that our students report as being one of their favorite parts of the program. And next. So most of our faculty, we found, were very unfamiliar with competency-based as a model as we started this process. And with our little group in our early childhood program, that really wasn't a problem. We were working so closely with them. They were deeply involved in that curriculum development, and they couldn't wait to get in there and test it out with students. And that was fantastic. But across the university more broadly, there was, because people weren't as involved and it was kind of a distant thing, they were given a lot of information. Hey, we're doing CBE and here's what it is. And, but a slide presentation is not the same as, having your arms in it. And there definitely were some challenges related to that. There were faculty who felt like, oh, maybe this is just a way to, push us out of the picture or make us less important, minimize our roles. This isn't traditional higher ed. I don't know if I like this. Honestly, for me, I was in graduate school when online learning really started to burgeon. And it was very similar experience for me I remember the faculty at my university being very, very uncertain and grumpy and skeptical about online. Oh, this is terrible. This is just gonna, end our whole jobs. Our universities are going to disappear. This is lightweight. This is no good. It's kind of the same kind of fear around change that I was hearing about competency-based. So I think it really is not specific at all to CBE, but it's really just more about change management and helping people understand that, innovation is just be open to it. Let's see what we can do. Helping people feel involved and a part of it would really be helpful. And we did try. It isn't that we didn't do anything. We certainly did. We had a CBE council. We brought some faculty reps in to talk about policy and process. You look at your student handbook and what are the processes around petitions and satisfactory academic progress, and how do you measure faculty workload when you're not being assigned a regular course, and how do you compensate faculty? And we did involve faculty in task forces and work groups around those things. But I feel like a lesson learned for me is just, if at all possible, the more you can communicate, the more you can collaborate, the more you can engage your faculty in the process early on, making sure they understand that while it may represent a change in terms of how they interact with students, it's not necessarily negative. And in fact, we had many of our faculty who found that they really loved working one-on-one with the students. They liked that individual, personal touch, that they all got to know my students much better. And so, it's familiarity and opportunity to engage and participate that I think really will help more than anything to overcome those misconceptions. And then just on a micro level, as the director of the MS and Early Childhood Studies program, one practice that I put in place right from the beginning that I found incredibly valuable was just to pull together my faculty, my coaches, and kind of an agendaless hour each week that we would just get together and talk about challenges we were experiencing, things we noticed, maybe, and the coaches were great about being able to point out, hey, this student's feeling really frustrated about the fact they're struggling with this particular assessment. Sometimes calling our attention to things that, we could see, yes, it's this piece of the rubric, or it's this part of the assessment that maybe isn't clear, is causing some problems. So being able to really have that team approach and have everybody feel like they're empowered to help, inform the changes and the continuous improvement was really valuable. And then just finally, I just want to close by saying that while I was super excited about this process, I felt honored to be involved in it. I love innovation. I love curriculum development. I'm pretty good with change. But I was skeptical. I wasn't 100% sold. I wasn't sure how this was going to go. I was worried that, is this just a way to hurry students through, to maybe water things down so it's easier for students? And I totally became a convert and a true believer, because I've learned that not only does competency-based offer our adult learners that greater flexibility, that greater relevance, but it's actually, in my view, more rigorous. That the students really have to demonstrate that they have that mastery, they have that proficiency over absolutely every single aspect of the program. I can't say that in competency-based, because if the student comes through with a B in a course, I don't know what pieces they're missing. I don't know where that gap is for them. And in competency-based, I felt very confident that every single one of those students had actually mastered every single one of those learning objectives and competencies before they were able to move along. So I think it's absolutely wonderful, and I'm more than happy to take questions now or, via email. I love talking about CBE. So thank you for letting me bend your ears, and I'll turn it back to Lisa.
Thanks, Martha. And we are going to come back to the slide deck. I do want to pause because I think this is a great time for us to take some questions and make sure that we get some early thinking, whether it's questions for Martha or just questions in general for the three of us. Happy to take those. I saw that Charla has been doing some due diligence in the chat with some questions, which we certainly appreciate. But Charla, you had mentioned that perhaps you had gotten a question that was directly sent to you, but maybe we could share with the whole group and get some info.
Absolutely. There was a question about, is there data to reflect students' state content exam passing rate for institutions that are using CBE? So we talked about this yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. In the main session, we had a question about how do you handle state licensure if you go beyond your borders? Is there a way, and have we pulled out pass rates in those CBE institutions for where there's licensure? I know of a particular institution's scoring, but I've not seen anything across CBE institutions by licensure. Martha or Lisa, do you know?
I don't know, but I think it's a fantastic question, and I'd love to see those data.
So Martha, one thing we might do is have you and some of the others doing early childhood, WGU comes to mind, and others think about how we might pull that kind of data together. I am happy to talk offline. So thank you for that great question. I had not seen it, and I am happy to do a little follow-up and see if we can get that for you in the future, or at least give it to the team at INCRA to share.
Thank you. Thank you. And then a couple questions. Tony, I'm going to just share these, and please feel free to chime in. But the first question really for Martha is around in designing the competencies, were state licensure standards or national standards considered as you did that work?
Absolutely. Our program is not a licensure program. However, we did look closely at NAEYC standards, professional standards, and they are the same standards that are required for licensure. So I would say at the time that we designed the program, it was not fully aligned to those NAEYC standards, but it was heavily informed. And going forward, as we have worked on upgrading the programs over time, we are bringing them into alignment, full alignment with NAEYC, so that we can seek accreditation from them.
And the second question is around faculty roles. Do faculty ever take on multiple roles? Assessor,
Yes.
content expert,
Yes.
expert
In
coach?
our model, they did, yes.
Can you give us just a little bit more of a flavor kind of what that looks like? And then I'm happy to also share other ways we've seen it in practice too. So
Sure,
do you mind sharing a little bit about that journey? Yeah.
Yes, of course. Yeah, when we had the unbundled roles, and again, keep in mind, this was early days and our program was quite small and we had very few faculty. So we would assign different competencies to the different faculty. And so let's say faculty A might be assessor for this group of competencies and instructor for another group. And it worked well for us because some people like one role better than the other, but most people didn't want to just be limited to one.
That's great. And I think, one thing to share is that Western Governors University is one that does keep it separate. This is just my personal bias maybe, or just kind of insight, is that I think it's a little bit easier to keep them very separate when you have scale, like they, a larger amount of students. I think when you're really getting started, even though there's always benefit to having a third party assessor who's not, who can be very unbiased and really hone in on that. I think there's some benefits as you're starting out to keeping those roles together. And then if you do get large, get to scale, you can continue to evolve. And I think the evolution that Martha shared, where they started out totally separate and then they came back together, I think just as a testament to, as you're figuring out competency-based education or competency-based practices for you, for your courses, for your institution, there is not a one size fits all. And so you have to be ready to iterate and to pivot and to move. And I know that we all had to move really fast to like emergency remote instruction, but that kind of like iterating in higher ed usually kind of causes a lot of anxiety. But I think it's a testament to the fact it's not one size fits all. And you get into a pilot kind of mindset. You go out there, you test it, you learn, you improve, you come back. So any other questions? Just want to open it up before we kind of shift gears and start to talk a little bit about backwards design and how the competencies were constructed. But
I have a question. We were all embarked in the module project that 5 institutions created, and then we looked at as a faculty. Within those modules, a lot of them are personal, like individualized modules so that students go through. And then Martha talked about your institution had the social interaction among the students themselves. And then throughout the module that I looked at for assessment, there was only 1 or 2 components that has the students feedback each other. But the question I am asking here is that how individual has different pace of it. And then, for example, some of my students like to tackle it at 1 o'clock in the morning compared to other students who are doing it during the morning. How you kind of leverage or kind of have that interaction going on with them to meet the kind of deadline that you put it out, or due date, or to passing it. I understand that it is individualized, so you kind of doing it, but I remember yesterday it was like a 3 weeks, you signed up for 3 weeks one, or there is a time limit to pass on to that mastery level. How you engaging with the making sure that students interacting each other while going through this module, and then making sure that there is a hands-on experience. I don't see hands-on experiences from going through the module itself for especially early childhood students who's going to be teaching early childhood children, right? So how you promote those feedback and interaction among students?
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. I think I can share from, and Tony, please chime in as well. Like, quite a few of the assessments are certainly, practical or something that they need to do on the job. And it's always the intent with the modules to make sure that there is some form of interaction, whether that's through discussions that you might see online or discussions. Some of our programs are doing some hybrid or face-to-face. And so it's almost like that flipped classroom model where students are working through content online. And then when they're in person, that's where they really get kind of some more robust kind of collaborative work happening, which is really great. But I do think it's a really good call out to ask, like, well, what does this mean for faculty when we have students working at 1 a.m, when you have someone else working at 3 p.m. and someone's really far ahead and someone's not quite to that point? And Martha, I know you as program director, had to wrestle with some of those faculty roles and parameters, but can you share what kind of insights or advice you have?
Sure, and it's a real challenge. There's no question, because in our model, students are entering and exiting competencies at different rates, and we did build in discussion boards that the faculty and students have a discussion board, and there's a place where students can also post. But of course, that student might be in that competency alone. I mean, that is a possibility. So one of the things that we've done is to create a Facebook group for our early childhood competency-based students. And that's a place there is, so it's not actually part of the assignments and the assessments, but it's a place where they can go and interact, and it is highly active. They really get very involved there. So we do try to give them some sort of extracurricular opportunities, as well as building in at least the opportunity into the competency learning activities. Not that they will always take advantage of those, but we try to make sure they have at least that opportunity.
Thank you, Bertha. Any other questions or thoughts as you're thinking about what integrating competencies might look like for you? Okay.
Also, just a reminder, we are about 6 minutes out.
Oh, 6. That's good to know. I was okay. I thought it was 9. So thank you. I'm glad you chimed in there, Stephanie. Appreciate it. And so I think with the time we have left, what I'd like to do is hand it to Charla to just talk about some of the tools that you actually have either in your Dropbox, or if you asked for things to be mailed to you, you should have received two pieces here. One is the quality framework, which Charla is going to talk about, and the other is the user's guide. And just want to share a little bit more detail about these two resources and how you might be able to use them as you're thinking about a competency-based approach. So Charla?
So the field really came together back in 2015, 2016, and said, we've got a lot of new people coming into this space and saying we want to do CBE, and we had some folks that we were kind of concerned, would they do it well? And so as a field, and at that point there were about 40 institutions, that broadened out to about 100 institutions, and then about 100 more experts said, well, let's craft a framework around what is quality. What does quality look like if you're going to put a CBE label on it? We started with something called shared design elements. That shared design elements emerged into a quality framework, which you have in your materials or online and available to you. There are 8 elements of quality. Each element of quality has an overarching principle. Underneath the principle, then it breaks it down into standards of performance. And then when you turn the page, usually there are performance indicators that say, tell me what that standard looks like when it's at an initial, emerging, developed, and highly developed performance by an institution. So if you are using or wanting to do CBE or embed competencies into a course, you can literally pick up this guide, flip over to the performance indicators, and it begins to give you a roadmap on how to build out a program so that it can be of quality. Why don't you go on to the next slide as well? So there are it missed one. There are 8 elements of quality. The first one being, I have to have an institution commitment to and capacity for CBE. Don't think you can go do this on your own without your boss knowing it, your provost knowing it, and supporting it, right? Somebody had posted the question, Jean had posted a question like, we only have 1 faculty. How do you think we're going to do all this? Well, maybe having 1 faculty is unrealistic. Maybe it's exactly where it needs to be based on the size of your program. I don't know, because I'm not your dean, but I would say you got to have a commitment that doing this makes sense. And sometimes that means investing, and not sometimes, it always means making some sort of an investment in it. So then we think about, do you know your competencies? You get those from INCRA, really, which is great in the Gateway's credential. It's phenomenal. The coherent program and the curriculum design. Then do I have that robust assessment strategy? Then when we go to the next slide and look at 5, 6, 7, and 8, we look at, do we have that learner experience? Do I have a learning journey like Martha talked about that sequences and scaffolds the learning into an experience where I know at the end, this person's going to be able to demonstrate the performance I want? Do we collaborate with external partners, Beth's professional development organizations? Are we partnering with them? Are we working with employers? How good are you at being transparent about your learning, saying up front, this is what you need to know and be able to do, and here's how I expect you to perform. If you do it, you get to advance, or you get to earn the credential. And then are we transcribing that as well? And then finally, are you collecting evidence to know? So right now in the pilot that they're running with these 5 institutions, they're collecting data. Did that work? Did it not? Do I need to adjust? Was there any feedback? Did they have an opportunity to be in community? Oh, we should probably tweak that here, right? So am I using evidence to continuously improve what I do? That's what our quality framework begins to share with you. The user's guide, then we had about 20 institutions who said, ooh, let me take the quality framework and talk to institutions and tell them how to put it into application. And so they created a user's guide, and it says, oh, I want to tell them who I brought to the table to work on this, and I want to tell them how I did this, and I want to share this great idea. So that's what the user's guide does, is help you take that quality framework and begin to implement it at your own school. So I think that leaves us almost with like 1 minute to spare, doesn't it?
Right.
The other thing that I would say is, those of you that want to do it, we do an annual conference called CBE Exchange, not to have a commercial, but I'm going to do a commercial. It's CBE Exchange. It's being held this year, November 9th through the 12th in Austin, Texas. I'm going to try to type and talk at the same time. It's a great conference, about 500 in-person folks typically coming together to talk about CBE, the way they do it, to learn from people like Martha and others. This group has been down there, I know, and talked about gateways. So lots of great opportunities. Encourage you to take a look at that conference as well. So thank you for that.
Charla, thank you for that overview. Encourage anyone who's using the user's guide or still has very kind of questions that feel very nuanced to your institution, please reach out to us. The 3 of us are always happy and excited to chat through any challenges, or if you're having trouble wrapping your brain around how this would work for you. Happy to talk more. And then would just ask Stephanie, if anyone reaches out directly to you or anyone else, feel free to pass along our contact information as well. So we are right at time, I do believe, and I think we're heading into a break before the 11:45 session. So enjoy your 20 minutes, and thank you everyone for your time. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Good to be with you.
Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.